Hey, everybody, welcome to the Common Good Podcast. I'm Dan Dietrich, and that's Doug Pagitt. I'm in Southwest Michigan, and Doug, you may be interested to hear this little note about the weather. Yesterday was like 65, and we were out in the garden. We were in short sleeves, taking walks around the neighborhood. This morning, 2 inches of snow. So it's, it's below freezing, and there's snow.
Perfect. One day you're clearing the yard, the next day which is a Colorado thing, right? Like people do that in Colorado all the time. They don't worry about it. It's like, hey, it was beautiful today, snowed, it's going to be beautiful. Yeah. But not in Michigan. Like, it's an emotionally triggering event.
I thought we were through this.
Yeah.
Here we are.
Feel that way. Well, West Michigan, where you are and where you're speaking of, is a place that we just were this weekend. Always enjoy the good people of West Michigan. And boy, in the political world, they've had a lot going on, you folks. Big day yesterday in the primaries. I guess it's a big day. I don't know.
Yeah.
I'm always curious about who chooses to vote in primaries when the decision has already been made. Either
right.
the incumbent is running, or there's been enough delegates, or the polling or whatever tells you someone's going to win, and yet some people still participate in the primary elections.
Mm-hmm. I had a couple friends ask me, like, "Hey, should I?" Because it's an open primary, you can vote Republican or Democrat, and they're like, "Should I jump in the Republican side of things and vote for anybody but Trump just to, make a statement that way?" I thought that was interesting. Yeah, why not?
Apparently, that was a lot. Nikki Haley picked up nearly 30%, and some of the analysis is already saying that it was people who would not otherwise be voting for the Republican candidate at the top of the ticket. So that's a curious number.
And then on the Democrat side, we talked about this yesterday on the Politics podcast, but there's this move called Listen to Michigan or something like that. A push for Democrat voters to write in undecided on the Democrat side, and they were hoping to get 10,000 people to write in undecided as a statement telling Joe Biden to do something about the Israel-Gaza situation. And it turns out they got 40,000 people to write in undecided, so they blew past their goal, and so I thought that was interesting too. Pretty strong showing for that movement.
Yeah, the uncommitted statement for a lot of people is related to the policies of the administration as it relates to the Israel-Hamas conflict and violence that Israel is continuing to inflict on the people in Gaza. Yeah, so that's where it's coming from. But I did hear that in 2012, is that right? You're right, when Obama was running for re-election, there was 13% of uncommitted voters in the primary.
So there's usually a fair amount, but this was up to 30% or something like that. It's a pretty significant uptick.
Yep. Yeah. It's a thing that people do with primaries is they make other decisions and make other statements. And we're trying to impact people's thoughts about all this too, wanting them to take in other ideas than just their typical identity. Because frankly, for anyone, and maybe some people don't like this idea, that we would suggest that every individual voting should have a sense of autonomy and agency between any other commitments they have, whether that's they're part of a religious community or they're part of a union or they're a member of a political party. That when it comes to vote, you should take that seriously as a person who's going to say, this is how I choose to use my vote in this moment, right? And not feel like somehow your voting is should be taken for granted by you or by anybody else of how you're going to vote. That a little bit of paying attention is a really good thing. And for some people, they've switched their political allegiances and their political desires. So they used to vote for one party or would switch around, and now they're more committed to voting only one direction or the other way. Some people have been much more, hey, I was real loosey-goosey and now I'm locked in, or I was really locked in, I'm real loosey-goosey. So a lot of that's going on.
Mm-hmm.
And we're part of a film there that was shown in West Michigan. It's still showing in West Michigan. So if you're watching this now and you're in West Michigan, head on over to the AMC in Holland, and you can pick up your own showing of God and Country, a film that is produced by Rob Reiner and has a bunch of people from our world of Vote Common Good in it, and other people that we are in the same work along with, who are interviewed in this movie. And it's a documentary style film about the threat of Christian nationalism in the United States. And it's based on a book by someone named Catherine Stewart, a part of the Vote Common Good life and community. And we'll be doing an event with Catherine out in Santa Barbara, California on March 7th. But this film that was made and was released 2 weeks ago is getting a lot of attention from people who care about this sort of thing. So on Saturday, we hosted a showing. Well, we attended a showing of the film at the AMC Theater, and then hosted talkback after it with after the first show with Kristin Du Mez, and then after the second show with Nick Brock. And it was Dan and I, Dan running what you're going to be the beneficiaries of, running the audio and video of our conversation with Kristin, and me in conversation with Kristin. So it was, I've never been in a film like this before, so that was new for me as an experience. And then I've never led a talk back inside of a theater. I've been part of one because back in I'd forgotten all about this, in 2006, when the Da Vinci Code came out.
Oh man, I remember that whole thing.
I think it was 2006. I think that's right. Maybe 4 or 5, 2004 or 5, but I think it was 2006. I had written a book called Body Prayer, and I was in Germany doing a thing with a bunch of church leaders there. And that film came out, and they're like, hey, this American author is in town talking about the Da Vinci Code, and we should have a conversation with them. And it was all about George Bush politics.
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
So I was sitting in a theater after had to watch the film, and then sat in the theater up on a panel at that case. And I'd totally forgotten about that whole experience. I think it was in Dresden or something, even, where this thing happened.
Oh, wow.
I quite remember. But that was trippy. But Kristin and I chatted about the film, how it came about, our own experience with it, what we think of it, took some audience questions, and we're going to bring that live to you.
Yeah.
Now. I mean,
and hopefully
live right now.
Right. Hopefully you'll go see the film. You don't need to have seen the film to enjoy this conversation. I don't think it touches on a lot of things that have just been in the news, so you'll be a beneficiary whether you've seen the film or not.
And if you're thinking, hey, it's not showing anywhere near me, if you go on the Vote Common Good website, you can find where it's showing. It's showing all over the country, but in like 100 theaters, not like in 500 theaters or 700 theaters. So a smaller theatrical release. And then it will be on streaming services, I have heard, as soon as the end of March. So in the next 4 or 5 weeks, you should be able to start seeing something about this film called God and Country, and have a chance to watch it. I mentioned this yesterday, but some people that I know who are Trump supporters attended the film, friends of mine, and they don't really keep up on the politics side of this stuff quite as much. They didn't know the term Christian nationalism. They were unfamiliar with that term, and one of the people after this thing was done said, yeah, I think so-and-so and I, who were together at this, I think we lean more nationalist. I think we're more like that. So they got the language they needed to explain the positions that they hold. I bring that up simply to say, apparently the film depicts both sides well enough that reasonable people could say, I see myself on that side.
I don't think it's making caricatures of either side. And so you can watch it and say, like, oh, no, yeah, that's an accurate representation of what I believe.
I don't know why anyone would. It was stunning to me.
Yeah.
But again, this is what makes part of one of the features that makes the world wonderful, is that people are in ways that are inexplicable sometimes. And sometimes we can find great joy in it. And other times it's just a conundrum. And sometimes it can feel really dangerous. There's a political outcome to some of this that can have real impact that we know impacts people's lives. And for those of us who believe the common good is served by people like Donald Trump and those who support Christian nationalism not being in elected office, we want to use this film for that purpose. And if people, I don't know, see it otherwise, that's how it is. So Kristin is a major voice in this world. If you're unfamiliar with her, she is very she's in a lot of spaces. She speaks a lot on these issues. She wrote a book called Jesus and John Wayne that a lot of people are excited about, and it describes the move to masculinity in Christianity and to hypermasculinity, and how there's this whole movement that wants their Jesus to be a little more John Wayne-like, and that explains the title. But then she really goes through and articulates a lot of the things that have happened inside of Christianity in the last 35 or 40 years. And Dan, I don't know if you remember, but just before Jesus and John Wayne was, well, maybe this is even before you were in the Vote Common Good universe, one of the events that we held in Holland, Michigan, so it could have been in 2018 or it may have been in 2020. We've been there so many times that I can't quite remember. We had a little after party over at someone's house, right near the where we did this thing, and Kristin was there and
had a preview copy of her book. Yeah, I remember seeing it.
Okay, so this was 2020. And she was there, and I remember meeting her and someone saying, "Hey, this is Kristin. She's a professor at the Calvin College here, and she has this book coming out. People are really going to love it." And I mean, I believe that, like I believe everybody. As somebody who's written a lot of books, you really do believe that your book is people are going to love it and that people are going to read it. Most of the time, though, people don't really get excited about any books that are published. There's more books that are published that people are not excited about in the population than are.
Or a handful of people get excited in a small niche world.
Totally. Yeah. Yes. And I thought, well, maybe a book about Christian nationalism or about male masculinity and the effects of Christian nationalism. Yeah, maybe some people are going to be excited about that. Ended up being an exceptionally well-received book, well-deserved. And Kristin has since then become someone who's really in demand and doing great work. And so she's been a good friend for our work and a good friend to many of us. And so glad to be in this conversation with her. And so that's that. So we're sitting on stools with a big white theater screen behind us. And here we go. And
aggressive cleaning lights. Movie theaters are not designed for anything other than sitting in the dark and watching a movie, or having lots of lights on so you can see all the popcorn and clean it up after. So,
hey, great point. These are theaters. These are spaces designed to watch recordings, not to make recordings. It's a life lesson, right? In the recording, viewing infrastructure, some places are made for making them, and some are made for watching those things that are made. And this was clearly, yes. If we couldn't look any more pale and sort of real life, like, I guess, instead of the flattering cameras and camera angles. But nonetheless, might be a really good one. So here it is, a conversation that we had just the other night.
There you go.
I'm with Vote Common Good. This is Dan Dietrich from Vote Common Good. Also lives here in West Michigan. I live in Minneapolis. And you might know Nick Brock from Vote Common Good West Michigan back there. So three of us are super glad to be here, and always glad to be with Kristin. So Kristin, thank you for being part of this.
Yeah, thanks for having me. And thank you all for coming. It's really great to have you all here and to be with people who care about this. And I know that so many of you are doing really good work in your spaces.
Well, this is the third time I've seen the film. Kristin, you've seen it
5 times.
5 times. Do you think you're up for an Academy Award for Best Spoken Head in a documentary film? Yeah, it would be great. Did you ever think, Kristin, when you were doing the work you do, that you'd end up in a movie theater up on a screen talking about Christian nationalism?
Yeah. No. Furthest thing from my mind. And frankly, I much prefer to be in a room by myself with archival materials working on a computer screen. That's my comfort zone. And yet here we are.
Yeah. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about how we ended up in this film and what's happening with it. Is that good? Yeah. Can you talk a little bit about how you first heard about or got invited to be part of this film?
I'll go first, then you can answer too. So I was actually contacted very early on by Katherine Stewart. This is an adaptation of her book, The Power Worshippers. Anybody here have read that book? Oh, good. 2 or 3. All of you should read that book. It's so, so good. So Katherine and I go back several years. She actually was one of my endorsers for Jesus and John Wayne. And her book, The Power Worshippers, really tracks the kind of behind the scenes scaffolding of the religious right, the funding, the networks, the organizations, and it's just meticulously researched. She's an investigative reporter. So I knew her from that, and that's why I reached out to her. She immediately read the manuscript for Jesus and John Wayne, endorsed it, and we've been good friends ever since. So she actually approached me very early on. First, I knew about this project before it even got picked up, and then she came back to me and asked if I'd be in it, and I said absolutely. And then when I was actually giving the interview, and I just told you this before we came in here, I was actually a little taken aback because I thought I was going to be asked primarily in my role as historian about the kinds of networking and scaffolding that her book had been about. And then they asked me about my personal faith and about growing up Christian. And I actually paused the interview and said, what are you doing and what is this? Because that's not what I had actually thought I had signed up for. And then they explained, and in a way that I agreed with, that what's really important when we talk about the threat of Christian nationalism, which is hard enough to do as it is, that we make clear this is not against Christianity, and that Christians can be against Christian nationalism. And in fact, many of those of us who are speaking out against Christian nationalism and the dangers are ourselves devout Christians. I agreed with that. And even though that was very much outside of my comfort zone, I agreed to participate in that respect. And so you can see I'm doing both in this film, and that's the case for a few of us. So that's my origin story. How about yours?
Yeah. Mine goes back equally far back. All those names that you see up on a screen, which normally when I'm watching a film, I don't pay any attention to the names up there. But it's a good reminder that these things are created by people doing things. Individual people making choices and doing something. One of the names that you would see up there is someone named Steve Oken. Now, it just came up as producer Steve Oken. Well, Steve is someone who was involved with our organization, Vote Common Good, and told me about Katherine's book, first of all, and said, I don't know if you've read this, but this is super helpful and super important. This is well before January 6, 2021. This is back in 2019, early 2020, where we started talking about the influence of Christian nationalism on our society. And Steve then said, I think this needs to be made into a film and I want to acquire the rights to it. So started working on that. So years ago, started working on these, on taking this book and making it available to people. Because not everybody wants to read an entire book about a topic like this, right? It's hard enough to get people to come for an hour-and-a-half long film on a topic like this. But these are decisions being made. Katherine Stewart working for years to help understand what's going on in the religious right and how it's funded and what its structures are. Kristin Du Mez working so hard to help articulate the kind of Christianity that some of us have experienced. Steve Oken wanting to make a film. Rob Reiner saying we want to join in on that film. Many of you involved in the work you're doing. It's individual choices that people are going to make that's going to make a determination about what exists in the future. The future doesn't exist short of the decisions we make to make it. So if you felt like at the end of this film, boy, it didn't tell us what to do. I don't know, did anybody have that feeling? Okay. Yeah, have you heard that where people's critique is like, well, I didn't really get an explanation of what Christian nationalism is and I don't know what to do.
I mean, I've heard a lot of critiques, but yes, that's one of them.
Yes. Oh, okay. I can't wait to hear more. I have too. Well, look, there's a difference between problems and predicaments. Problems have solutions. Predicaments require multiple responses. Our dishwasher broke last week. We had to go get a new one. I took it out, had to change the piping in there. The valve broke. I went to Home Depot last night at 8 o'clock and said, this is broken. And they said, buy this and put it in there. That's a problem that has a solution. My wife and I deciding which dishwasher we're going to install, that's a predicament. That involves different people with very complicated sets of expectations. Christian nationalism is not a simple problem with a single solution. It's a predicament that has faced this country from its founding and before, and it's going to continue. And it's going to take multiple responses from all of us in all of our conditions, in the side of all of our relationships. And that's what I hope this film does for you. Now, frankly, I'm shocked that we're sitting in a movie theater watching it. It's great. But it's not everything. This isn't the beginning and end of it. Do you want to talk about any critiques or anything that you've heard, or your own thoughts about the film and what you wish it had or didn't have, or any?
Yeah, I mean, there are critiques coming from all sides, right? I mean, when the trailer released, it was, how dare you Christians team up with secular atheists, and then worse things were said, a person like Rob Reiner, and to attack Christians, to persecute Christians even, right? And to me, that was a bit of a non-issue, because in my line of work, I work with all kinds of people, and often I don't even know what their faith commitments are. We're working in common cause. But one critique, well, I guess there are so many that could be raised. One was, that you don't delineate clearly enough between what is Christian and what is Christian nationalist, which is kind of wild, because on the other hand, a critique is you're whitewashing Christianity here by trying to salvage and distinguish Christianity from Christian nationalism. So you can see the critiques are coming from left and right, which doesn't necessarily mean you got it just right. But it just means that there is no way to address an issue like this and please everyone. It is just impossible to do that. And in fact, many of the people that were really, really critical of us teaming up with Rob Reiner were those who had never uttered a word about Rob Reiner before in their lives, but really don't like what we're doing, right? So I feel like, rather than us being tarnished by Reiner, it's almost the reverse that was going on there. One question that I'll pose to you, which was a critique that came out in the pages of Christianity Today, I think last week or so, was that this film may have some merits, but it's preaching to the choir. It's not going to convert any diehard MAGA folks. And so I'll toss that one to you and see what you think. And maybe you can reflect on who you think the audience is, or the intended audiences are for this film.
I know that the producers want the film to be accessible to people who are unnerved and uncomfortable by Christian nationalism and still see themselves rooted inside of their Christian faith. That was very important to them. I don't think the filmmakers see their job as trying to take hardcore MAGA supporters or hardcore Christian nationalists and to convert them by them watching a single film. I don't think that's their point. I don't think that should be the point of any film. Our organization, Vote Common Good, we work with people who have a blended identity of being Christian with being Republican, and they're uncomfortable with that blended identity. And they want there to be two different identities, or at least they want to feel the freedom to choose. And they may not want to stay Republican any longer, but they do want to stay Christian. But that's not the same thing as convincing someone that they should separate their identities. I've spent my adult life as an evangelical and as someone who's also sort of evangelistic about things, like not only about religion, but I just like convincing people of stuff I like. So I don't know, we can talk about stuff and I would just start talking about things I like. In fact, hang around afterward. We'll just come up with some topics and we'll talk about stuff we like and try to help each other figure it out. But that doesn't mean I try to get people to do things they don't want to do. I don't think these filmmakers or Vote Common Good or the author of Jesus and John Wayne. If you're not familiar with the book Jesus and John Wayne, I would be shocked if you're in this theater. But that book is not trying to convince people to change their minds. It's trying to help people whose minds are changing to continue on that path. There are people who don't know this stuff. They're watching it and they're like, I had no idea. That's really different than trying to convince someone. So if you've already thought to yourself, I wonder how I could get my brother-in-law. I wonder how I could get my sister-in-law. I wonder how I could get my aunt to see this film. Was anyone thinking things like that as you're sitting here? Yeah. Like, people have asked me, like, what can we do to get more people to come? I'm like, I've been an evangelical preacher my whole adult life. Trying to get people to do things they don't want to do, that doesn't work. Getting people to do things they do want to do, that barely works. So we have to measure ourselves a bit in how we think it all works, what we think is going on. I'll just say, as a church leader, preaching to the choir really helps the choir. The choir in this country has been quiet for too long. And I think a little preaching to the choir is not a bad idea. See, I'm preaching to the choir. See how easy that is? That's how it works. No, but seriously, I just think, look, a little bit of encouragement for all of us that stay quiet too long. So if I could give anybody any encouragement, is just say something more than you were saying yesterday, tomorrow. Don't have to do it today, but do it tomorrow. Just say a little more, because we don't have, look, the problem in America is not going to be solved by telling people to be quiet. The future of America will be changed when we all start saying more. And there's a lot of us who go through our lives, and a lot of church leaders who go through their ministries in times of crisis with their Zoom audio on perpetual mute. And somebody's having to say, we can't hear you, I think you're on mute. I just think we need to take off our mute on a whole lot of things and start saying more things. And if this film helps people do that, Kristen, I think it's a good idea. So I've got all kinds of thoughts. Can't stand the poster, personally. WWJD with what would Jesus do? Why is that the poster of this thing? Totally don't get it, but what do I know about all this? So I've got all kinds of thoughts about stuff that's in the film and could have been in the film and other people that should have been in the film. But overall, if it helps people say a little more, I feel like that's a good thing. Do you think?
Yeah, absolutely. It's funny because my publicist, when Jesus and John Wayne was coming out, actually came up with some promo material with the WWJD on it, and I was like, "Oh no, don't let's not go that direction." But so it was funny to see that then on the film. One other thing that I think is worth mentioning with respect to this portrayal is, you've got a lot of different strands here. You had the charismatic revival, right? The prophecy stuff, and that was really heavy in the January 6th section. You had Tony Perkins, which is a little bit more in the mainstream religious right, and you have all sorts of figures. I think we had Jerry Falwell Sr., Jerry Falwell Jr., a lot of these. We're looking at a really broad spectrum of evangelicals. And we also had the comment, it's not just evangelicals, it's mainliners, it's right, it's a diverse group. That is really hard to convey in a film. It's really hard to convey. I mean, I have an hour-long lecture that I give that just scratches the surface on the conversation around Christian nationalism, the survey data, who we're talking about, what it actually looks like, and you don't have to put it to pictures and music and things like that, right? Which is a film is a whole different genre. But what I would say is, so some people are suggesting that, oh, you can't just look at the Lance Wallnau and then tar the 81% with being New Apostolic Reformation, which is true. But here's the thing. We've got some of the real movement leaders represented here, who then end up having a enormous impact through mobilization. And we had some clues there, and that's the stuff that was really coming from Stewart's book. on how they are tracking voters, how they are working through churches, through pastors, through networks. And so what we have is a large swath of this 81%, if you will, who may be well-intentioned, may have no goal of doing away with our democracy, who are still complicit in this broader movement that is being led by some pretty fringe, pretty extremist figures like those in the New Apostolic Reformation, right? So that's kind of what we're looking at. So how do you describe and define that movement, which is why it is so key for Christians wherever they find themselves along that spectrum to speak out and to say, yes, this, but absolutely no, this. Because right now, it's really a tactic on the part of Christian nationalists to suggest that anybody who is pushing back against Christian nationalism is pushing back against Christianity and is smearing all Christians. And when those of us who are Christians say, no, wait a minute, okay, first of all, fair warning, you may get attacked for doing it. But the more of us who are doing that, the more credibility we have. And I mean, bonus, it's actually true. Right, it is actually true. So we can be saying these things, and it is an accurate reflection. In the circles I move and across the country, the people who are most ardently speaking out against Christian nationalism right now are devout Christians.
We're going to get to some questions from you all in a moment. When our organization started, Vote Common Good started in 2018, there was a New York Times article about the idea that evangelical pastor like myself and some other people from the evangelical world wanted to reach out to the kinds of voters who no longer could find themselves in the Republican Party, right? So, and the way a story like that's going to go, they're going to talk to somebody on the other side. So there was an interview with Ralph Reed, who some of you might know already, but was in the film, the guy who was talking about reaching out to the voters in all the places, having all the data points. And he said something that was very true. He said, every few election cycles, some upstart of religious voter outreach comes around, people that want to do the others. He said, but I'm not at all concerned because there's no way they can match 40 years of organizing and the hundreds of millions of dollars that we have in place. And he was absolutely right.
He's right.
We can't match 40 years. We're 40 years behind. And he was going back to Jimmy Carter when there was a Democratic president who was an evangelical from Georgia, right? Saying we've shifted the playing field since then in 40 years. So yeah, we can't do that. But also, it takes a lot of money to maintain a 40-year network that works against people's sensibilities. The amount of money that it takes and structure and power and threat that it takes to keep pastors and seminaries and Christian colleges and publishers in line is really expensive. That big balloon costs a lot to keep inflated. A pin is really cheap compared to the price of that balloon. The right investments in the right places can perform something we like to joke as acupunctural intervention. A small insert can make a really big difference in the nervous system. So there's a certain amount of impact that you can have. And I would encourage you not to become diarist about it. It is true that the structure of Christianity in America tends to lean this direction. And look, it's across the mainline traditions. It's in Catholicism. It's certainly in evangelicalism. You're talking 50% or more of people that are into this kind of stuff, either aggressively or sort of passively. So there's a lot going on. But difference and intervention doesn't have to cost as much, but it does cost something. If you ask Kristin Du Mez how she spends her time, it's talking, can I overtalk for you? It's talking to reporters, it's travel, it's doing everything other than what she wants to be doing. The personal cost, both in time, energy, and finance that it takes to do what you do is a lot. Organizations like ours, organizations that many of you are a part of, they really do need your support and help. So any part you can play in that is going to be putting together the kind of response that can take place. So I would encourage all of you to find those groups, find those organizations. I don't know, send coffee things or money or I don't know, something
I'm good.
nice.
I'm good.
Okay, something nice, buy some book, do whatever, but find a way to be engaged because there's a structure going on that needs to be responded to, not in kind. That's not the way it's going to happen. That's not how this is going to work. But there's alternative responses to this thing that exists. So there are ways for all of us to be engaged and involved in this. And we hope you take this talk back and this film and all the other stuff that comes out as an invitation for you to be participating in all this. Ready for some questions?
Absolutely.
All right. We're just going to let you shout them out. And then we are recording this talk back, and we're going to make it available on a live stream if you have other people you think want to watch it or want to watch it again later, which would be weird. But anyway.
So the question is if I'm going to do more work on connections between Christian nationalism and German history or the Third Reich. And I don't know if you saw that little pause there. It was about 10 times as long when I was deciding, am I going to go there in this interview? Because I know how this works. First of all, you sign away all of your rights before you say your first word. When you give these interviews. So they can use them however they want forever. And you have no say. So it's hard to bring up that subject anyway, and then in that context. So I hesitated a very long time. But as I actually just wrote a piece on my Substack last week where I addressed that and where I include something I had written a couple of years ago on connections and how this came about. And in fact, the very first piece that I published on what would become Jesus and John Wayne, which was timed to Trump's inauguration, it went viral. And within a couple days, I got a letter from a scholar of Nazi propaganda who said, do you realize that all the things you're quoting from these evangelical books are exactly like what the German Christian movement was saying in the 1930s? And I responded to him, yes, I know. Right, that was my field. I'm fully aware. I don't think I can say it. So I've been tracking this for a long time. I'm not planning on writing specifically on that simply because I have not been active in that field for 20 years and a lot happens. And so I'm really deferring to actual specialists, although, I have some background, but I may end up writing, I'm finishing up another book right now. And then that one's due a week before the election in November. So prayers appreciated for that. And then what happens next is kind of an open question in a lot of ways. And depending on the results of the election will probably shape what direction I go. And there's a possibility that I may return to that at some point. Other questions?
But we really appreciate what folks like you are doing. You are stepping out in the cause of trying to preserve Christianity and democracy. I think the problem is we only know a handful of you who do it. And watching the film, we see dozens and dozens of well-funded people on the other side. We happen to get Doug's Vote Common Good email frequently, but I would love to get access to more people who are out there that we can support. You had said support people. We'd like to know more of who they are.
Yeah, so one place to go, and I'm not sure if it's set up yet, but it soon will be, is there's an organization called Christians Against Christian Nationalism. And I was just talking with their director a couple of weeks ago saying, hey, look, I'm speaking all over the country right now, and audiences who come are ready to do something. And it is a huge waste that I can't direct them to the places where they can actually go do something. And she said, we're on it. And so they're going to be coming out with a website that will connect people to organizations in your local community. And that's really helpful. So keep an eye out for that. I do have a newsletter on Substack that you can sign up for free. And I'm essentially dedicating it for the next several months to exactly kind of this cause. I'm highlighting works of scholarship, new books that are coming out, and older books that are now very relevant, including some on 20th century European history. And I'm going to be sharing opportunities to participate in things, to contribute to things for between now and the election, and then we'll see what happens after that. So that's one kind of clearinghouse where I'm going to try to bring different resources and make them available. But that Christians Against Christian Nationalism website, when it's up and running, will be a really good space, and I will be promoting that as soon as it is up and running in my Substack as well.
Some of the other groups that you may have seen in the film, Jamar Tisby is someone that you should follow and keep up on the work.
He has a great newsletter on Substack.
Excellent. And his work, as Kristin mentioned, Christians Against Christian Nationalism, which comes out from the American Baptists, are behind that effort. They're looking for funding and for your support, and they hold events in different places. Faithful America is another one that has a series of communications that go out and organizing. In fact, we travel the country. We have a big bus that says Faith, Hope, and Love, supporting democracy for all, resisting insurrections, and confronting Christian nationalism. So if you ever want to come with us and have a little fun in the country, it's great. We drove down to Eagle Pass to be around the truckers. We're going to be in California on March 7th with Kristen Stewart, running events on faith and democracy, rolling up on Franklin Graham and the border tour that they're doing, providing this counter messaging on the road. And Faithful America is a big part of that work. We're doing that work with them. So they're another one of the groups you might want to see. And Red Letter Christians, you saw Shane Claiborne in there at the end. That's another group that's involved in this. Now, the problem is we can name them all, to your point, right? We can name them all. So new things need to exist. And every one of those groups was started because someone or some small group of people said, I think we should do something about it. We have a predicament and we should respond to it. You might be someone who wants to respond to it and create something. And the thing we need to do is to invoke creator culture around these issues and have you create more things. The future is created. Our current experience is created by people's past, and the future is going to be created by people's choices. So I'd encourage you to consider that as well. Even the small upstart things that feel like they don't have much potential can really turn into something.
I look around this audience and many people have the same color hair as I. I know you work on college campuses. Can you speak to the spirit there and where college students are? Because, it has been 40 years, and we've lived through that period, but where are they?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So where are college students, the younger generation, where are they at in this? Now, in terms of commitment to Christian nationalism or so on, right, the statistics are encouraging. There's much less commitment among younger generations to kind of a partisan version of Christianity generally. But in terms of activism, I will say not a whole lot there. And I've been thinking a lot about this because I'm in my 40s and I feel like I'm too old for this. And in previous social movements, it's the college age that are really out there and even younger who are out there in the streets who are really pressing ahead. And it's not that there are none, but it really does seem to be 40, 50, 60-year-olds who are most alert to this. And I've thought about that some, and I thought, part of what we have here is college students, they're young. When you think about their kind of adult lives, very short. I mean, you're talking about we're touting that pro-life woman up there who's like, I've been working 5 years for this, right? That's like her like lifetime since she was in middle school, probably, right? So that's her adult life. All they've known is Trump. Like, this is their normal. And that's really concerning. And for those of us who are a little older, whoa, what happened, right? This is not normal. And then for those of us with a historical perspective in particular, this is not only not normal, this is dangerous. All sorts of red flags if you know 20th century history, right? So there's this, it's a weird disconnect for me as a historian when I look at kind of previous social movements and social justice movements, that it's not the 18, 19, 20-year-olds who are out front. We need more of them. We absolutely need more of them. We need them to feel empowered. There's a lot of apathy, and there's just a lot of there's a lot of reasons here, I think. There's a lot of folks on social media and not really the habits anymore of coming together and making something happen just across the board, and then in terms of politics as well. So if there are any ways to mobilize young folks, that would be absolutely critical. Really, everybody needs to be mobilized. Another challenge that we're up against is in 2016, there was a lot more energy up front of, we had the shock value, what's happening, we can do something. 2016 is a long time ago. And there's not that energy anymore, or there's not that false optimism that we can go out and march, women's march and march for immigrant rights and so on, and we're going to take care of this, right? We haven't taken care of it yet. So we have to not give up. And this is also where a historical perspective can come in handy, because a lot of movements for social change, especially for social justice, take a very long time. And one thing that we can absolutely learn from the civil rights movement, the long civil rights movement, is persistence, resilience, and not giving up. And we just have to be gritty and stick with it and keep pushing through however long it takes. Because what we do now and what we do in advance of 2024 election, if it's successful, is going to be a whole lot easier than what we're going to have to do on the other side of that election if we no longer have a functioning democracy. It's going to be so much harder. That's why I'm pushing myself to exhaustion right now, because it's just going to be so much more perilous, to be honest, if we don't succeed.
The truth of it is that in the Christian nationalism topic with college students, the energy is on the right. One of the groups that you saw up there was called Turning Point USA. Charlie Kirk is someone that was on there a number of times. Turning Point USA is directed specifically to college students and is recruiting thousands of college students with significant amount of energy and significant amount of organization behind it. I don't think it's a wise thing to believe that demographics are our destiny. And there's sometimes inside political spaces or future of America civic spaces that just say demographics are going to solve this. I was born in 1966, but if people believe that the youth movement of 1968 was going to solve America's problems, we shouldn't believe that demographics are the solution to this. So the choices that we make are going to be the solutions to this. That list you saw, it came by quickly. I've seen the film 3 times, so it's a little easy. I'm going to see it a 4th time at 7:30, by the way, if anyone wants to stick around. Yet another showing if you want a double dose of this with a talk back following that one as well. But what the second highest list on that organization on that group was Hillsdale College. Now, I know that Hillsdale College is pushing to a lot of adults and a lot of adult education, but a lot of money, and Turning Point USA. So, and a lot of us, tend to think that these things are just going to solve themselves and we just need to sort of run the clock out until demographics catch up. That's just not how it works in culture and society and shift. So I'm not sure what the future looks like, because I'll tell you, in 2016, I would have said to you, Christian nationalism exists, but it's nothing to fear. But in early 2020, I thought, a COVID virus, how bad could that be, right? So a lot of us can really underestimate things that have been around for a while and think that they don't have a deadly potential to them. So there's real choices that have to be made. Time for one or two more, I guess? Yeah.
Question, do you feel safe in your work? You want to take it first, Doug?
I do, and I say this partly with a wink. The most dangerous part of our work is driving around the country, truly. The roads are really dangerous. So, but yes, there is inherent risk in this, and there's inherent risk about being public. People can show up at your house. They can target you. They can do things. So yeah, I do feel that it's not an undue level of risk. I just saw the film the other night that's also playing here. Maybe you want to go next door, the Bob Marley film, which I didn't know that Bob Marley was in a political crisis in Jamaica in the 70s and was had assassination attempts on his life, and that's where his music all came from. So I don't feel physical harm like that risk, but I think about it every day. Like, is this actually dangerous, and how many people does it take? When we were in Eagle Pass, Texas last week, I kept thinking about the person who drove down to El Paso, Texas 5 years ago and committed mass homicide in a Walmart. So yeah, the risks are real, but it feels safe enough to keep doing it. How do you feel?
Yeah, I feel pretty safe. I do take some precautions from time to time. What I find is that when my words get picked up and put into online spaces, and a couple in particular, which I won't name because this will go out and I don't want to bring more, but it goes into then white nationalist spaces. And that's where some threats can come from. But all things considered, I get very few threats, and very few. And I have friends in the broader pro-democracy movement who are on the ground in places like Idaho, Oregon, working against white nationalism in local communities. And they have very real threats all the time, outside their door, death threats, actionable. And so that puts my sense of unease in perspective. And I will also say that when Trump won the night of 2016, I took a book off my shelf and I put it on my nightstand, and I kept it there for a year and would read it regularly. And it's Timothy Snyder's On Tyranny. And if you haven't read that book, read it. And I'll be writing more on that soon in my Substack in the next couple of months. But he has rules to fight tyranny, and a number of them. But my favorite one is do not obey in advance. Do not obey in advance. Like as authoritarian rule is taking hold, or there's a threat of it, and things are getting a little unnerving, the tendency of so many people is to go quiet, right? Because you're anticipating what might happen if you speak out, if you act out, and that is exactly the wrong thing to do. And I've always kept that in my mind when I feel like, oh, this could get me into trouble in my workplace, in out in the world. I'm like, could it really? Or am I going to just be not doing what I need to do because I actually think that it's a very safe time right now in this country for all of us to do what we need to be doing. And if we don't do these things now, it will probably be less safe down the road. So let's use this time extremely well.
And I'll also add, it's not as safe for everyone. We work with a lot of people in these spaces and organizations, and many people, because of their own social location, do experience risk at a different level. And so all of us need to estimate that. And I do not underestimate what being a tall, white evangelical means in this space. It gives me more latitude. And that's not true for everyone. And so we all need to, respond in the ways that make most sense for the situation we find ourselves in. Okay. You've all been here a long time. I mean, I'm impressed with your bladders, if nothing else. This has been a long time you've all been sitting here. You obviously know you can follow Kristin's work. If you don't know Vote Common Good, we'd welcome you to follow that. We have a bunch of curriculum on this, both small group curriculum on Christian nationalism, podcast, live. We do live training sessions. We travel the country doing those. Some of those are recorded. They're broken up in all kinds of segments. So there's a lot of material that we have, a lot of material that the other groups I mentioned already, Christians Against Christian Nationalism and Red Letter Christians and others, have material to help with this content if you really want to keep talking with other people about it. So I guess that's it, right? Anything else? Any last announcements from you?
No, thank you again so much for coming. Thank you for your interest in this subject, for your commitment to further education, and just blessings to you as you go back into your spaces. And I hope and pray that you can do good work there.